You've been told your whole life that you're smart. So why does it feel like the smartest thing you've done is hide how lost you actually are? If that sentence made something tighten in your chest, keep watching. This video is going to explain something about you that most people in your life never will. Let me guess something about you. You probably think faster than most conversations allow. You've sat in meetings or classrooms and felt a slow, quiet frustration because people were still explaining something you understood in the first 30 seconds. You've been called too much, too intense, too analytical, too in your head. Maybe you've been called sensitive or difficult or the one that really stings arrogant. Even though inside, you're the one who constantly doubts yourself. You probably have an ongoing internal monologue that never shuts off. You replay conversations. You notice the things people don't say. You feel genuinely excited about ideas that others find exhausting. And most nights, you go to bed feeling strangely alone. Not lonely in the way people show in movies. Lonely in the specific way of knowing you're surrounded by people who can't quite see the world the way you do. I want you to understand something deeply before we go further. None of that is a flaw. It is almost to the letter what psychology and neuroscience have documented about high IQ individuals for over 100 years. You're not broken. You're just rarely, if ever, explained to yourself honestly. Until now. I want to be upfront with you. I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not a neurologist. What I am is someone who spent years feeling exactly what I just described and then became obsessed with understanding why. What I'm going to share with you comes from the work of psychologists like Kazimierz Dombrowski, who spent decades studying gifted individuals. From Terman's longitudinal studies at Stanford, the longest running study of high IQ individuals in history, from more recent research at places like Johns Hopkins and the Gifted Development Center in Colorado, the picture these researchers paint is remarkably consistent and remarkably different from the picture most of us were given growing up. Studies tracking over 1,500 high IQ individuals across 35 years reveal patterns most people never see. Patterns that explain, not justify, but explain why being smart is often its own kind of invisible suffering. Here's something that gets almost no attention. High intelligence doesn't just change how fast you process information. It fundamentally changes how intensely you experience everything. A psychologist named Kazimierz Dombrowski, a Polish psychiatrist who worked extensively with gifted individuals, identified what he called overexcitabilities. These are 5 core domains where high IQ individuals are neurologically wired to feel more: psychomotor, sensory, intellectual, imaginational, and the most underestimated of all, emotional. That last one surprises most people. We assume smart people are detached, analytical, cold. But Dombrowski found the opposite. He found that people with high intellectual capacity often feel emotions with greater depth, not less. They feel more empathy, more existential dread, more beauty in things, more grief at injustice. They're not unfeeling robots. They're people who feel everything at a higher volume and have learned to pretend they don't because the world told them that was too much. The very intelligence that makes you see the world more clearly is also what makes you feel its weight more heavily. Think about it this way. Imagine everyone else is watching the world on a standard definition TV. You're watching in 8K. You see every pixel, every imperfection, every flicker. That's not a gift when you're watching something tragic. That level of detail becomes its own kind of pain. There's also what researchers call imposter syndrome inversion. Most people know imposter syndrome as the feeling that you're not as competent as people think. In high IQ individuals, the variation is almost crueler. The smarter you actually are, the more you know what you don't know. You see the complexity others miss, and so you hesitate, you doubt, you delay. While less capable people charge forward with unfounded confidence, you sit paralyzed by your own awareness of uncertainty. Psychologists call this metacognition overload. You think about thinking, you analyze the analysis, you second guess the second guessing, until eventually doing nothing feels safer than risking being wrong. Here's the reframe I want to offer you, and I want you to sit with this one. Every trait we've just talked about Every pattern that has felt like a problem, it's not a defect, it is a mismatch. It is a high-performance instrument living in an environment that was never designed for it. Your overthinking isn't weakness. It's pattern recognition operating without a worthy target. Your sensitivity isn't immaturity. It's a nervous system calibrated to detect nuance that others simply cannot perceive. Your perfectionism isn't self-sabotage. It's a standard-setting mechanism designed for output quality. It just hasn't been aimed at the right work yet. And your loneliness, that's not rejection. That is the natural consequence of being statistically rare. If you have a genuinely high IQ, you share your cognitive style with roughly 2 to 4% of the population. You've been trying to feel at home in a world designed for the other 96 to 98%. That is not a personal failure. That is a numbers problem. You haven't failed to fit in. You've succeeded at being uncommon. Those are two entirely different things, and only one of them requires your shame. The transition isn't from being smart to being happy. That's the wrong road. The real transition is from self-pathologizing to self-understanding. From why am I like this to this is what I am now. How do I build a life that fits it? I want to give you something you can actually take with you. A simple framework I call the Depth Model 5 traits that define high IQ psychology and the shadow side of each that most gifted people have never been taught to recognize. D is for depth of processing. You don't skim. You go deep on everything: tasks, conversations, decisions. The shadow side of this is paralysis by overanalysis. The fix is learning to set deliberate, good enough thresholds for low-stakes decisions and saving your depth for what actually deserves it. E is for emotional intensity. Your emotional range is wider than most people realize, and wider than you've probably been allowed to show. The shadow side is masking those emotions to appear rational or composed. The fix is finding even 1 or 2 people in your life who can hold your full range. Stop performing smallness for the comfort of others. P is for pattern recognition. You see connections and implications others miss, often years before they become obvious. The shadow side is that this same ability applies to threats. It can tip into catastrophizing. The fix is learning to deliberately distinguish between signal and noise. Not every pattern is a prophecy. T is for truth-seeking drive. You have a low tolerance for intellectual dishonesty, simplification, or pretense. The shadow side is social friction. Not everyone wants to dig as deep as you do, and they can experience your honesty as aggression. The fix is developing what I call cognitive code switching. Full depth for depth-capable relationships, functional surface engagement for everything else. H is for hyper-awareness. You read rooms, subtext, and unspoken dynamics with unusual precision. The shadow side is exhaustion, sensory, and emotional from processing a world that most people move through obliviously. The fix is naming this as a real cognitive cost and building genuine recovery time into your schedule the same way athletes schedule rest days. Depth. That's the model. And here's what matters most about it. These are not 5 problems. They are 5 amplified human capacities. The work is not to reduce them. The work is to direct them. I know some of you are already having a reaction. Let me address the most common ones. Some of you are thinking this sounds like an excuse. Smart people have advantages. They don't struggle like this. And you're right that high intelligence carries real advantages: processing speed, verbal reasoning, problem-solving ability. But advantages don't eliminate suffering. They redirect it. High IQ individuals don't suffer less. They often suffer in ways that are less visible and less validated because the world assumes they should be fine. That invisibility is its own kind of weight. Some of you are thinking, maybe I'm just average, and using this to feel special. That thought itself, the self-doubt, the fear of being self-aggrandizing, is a marker. Average intelligence rarely produces that level of self-monitoring. But more importantly, this isn't about a number on a test. If these patterns resonate with your lived experience, that resonance is what matters. Use what fits. Leave what doesn't. And some of you are thinking, understanding all this is nice, but it doesn't actually change anything. Understanding is the beginning of agency, not the end of it. When you no longer spend energy pathologizing yourself, you start spending it on building. That's not a small shift. That is the whole game. Every prison begins with the belief that the walls are permanent. I'm not going to ask you to buy anything. I'm not going to push a program or a course. I don't want to give you another thing to consume. What I want to give you is a single question, one that I gently encourage you to sit with tonight, or write about, or just let live quietly in the background of your mind. Which part of who I am have I been apologizing for that actually deserves to be celebrated? Write it in the comments if you feel like it. Not for me, for yourself. Writing makes thinking real. And if this video described your experience in a way that felt uncomfortably accurate, there's a video linked right here that goes deeper into how high sensitivity and high intelligence interact. Specifically, I think it continues exactly where this one left off. Let me leave you with this. For a long time, many of you have carried the quiet belief that you are fundamentally too much and somehow also not enough. Too intense for some people, not productive enough by your own standards. Too fast for some rooms, not confident enough to lead. Somewhere between all those contradictions, you got confused about who you actually are. But here's what the research, the psychology, and the stories of people like you throughout history all point toward. You were never the problem. You were in the wrong frame. A cello doesn't sound broken in a room full of drums. It just sounds like it needs an orchestra. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not failing at being normal. You are succeeding at being something the world needs more of, not less. And if no one has told you that clearly enough, in a way that actually landed, then I'm glad you found this video. I'll see you in the next one.